Let's get started. Welcome everyone to this Placer AI webinar, our back to school look back. We're going to look back at back to school and then ahead to what is coming the rest of this year. I am thrilled today to be joined by my guest, Jamie Passer, Chief Investment Officer at Edens. Jamie, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Ethan.
I'm excited about this one. I think part of the reason is it feels like we're standing at this really interesting kind of tipping point, as if we haven't had enough tipping points in the last 2 years of like what's been going on so far in the last 5-6 months and maybe turning things in a more positive direction, hopefully. But basically today we're going to do is a very, very brief introduction to Placer for those of you who are unfamiliar. We're going to dive into back to school and what we've learned over the last few months. And then finally, we're going to look ahead at what's coming. We are also going to leave some time for Q&A. If at any point throughout the webinar you have some questions, please let us know by using the Q&A button at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on how you have Zoom set up. And we will attempt to get to them either within the course of the conversation or at the end. The webinars are recorded and are available at the same link tomorrow. So on the actual link that you use to sign up, if you just plug in your information, you'll see a YouTube link, and then that is the recording. So introduction to Placer. So Placer is a location analytics company. What that means very simply, people vote with their feet. We're showing you how they vote across the United States every single day. How do we do that? We observe a panel of over 30 million devices very critically. This is all anonymized aggregate data. So we are GDPR and CCPA compliant. We then use that panel to run AI and machine learning algorithms to make estimations on visits to retail locations across the country. And then finally, we present that in a wealth of different reports within our platform on everything from true trade areas, the customer journey, cross-shopping, and a whole lot more. If anyone is interested, we have the free version of our premium product available at placer.ai and a section of our website called The Square, where we give access to a lot of our free tools that we are constantly updating. So now we get to the fun part of
That was a really quick introduction, Ethan. That was it.
I feel like I've hit the real quick version of it. But
you got that down. That's good.
I wonder how much it changes from webinar to webinar. That's the real question. But let's start by looking kind of like at retail overall, because we kind of have to acknowledge that things have been challenging, to say the least. We're still kind of in this adapting to a post-pandemic environment. There have been serious economic headwinds. From your perspective, how has retail performance aligned with your expectations in the back to school season?
Well, let's take a step back for a second, because I had the good fortune of being able to see some of these slides before we got in here. And one of the things I think is great about Placer is that it's like a multi-dimensional look at things. But so I would say when you put something like this up, it sends a message maybe of people, I guess you said people measure with their feet or speak with their feet, and feels sort of a little bit one-dimensional. But I'd like to think about all the things that are happening that could be causing these trends, right? So you have to sort of align this kind of data with what we're seeing in the sales data, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at the sales data for June and July, sales were up. No question, inflation is up, but sales itself are up. So what could be going on that sales are up, it looks like, but foot traffic is down? So let's talk about that a little bit. I think my sense is we're in this environment where this is probably the first summer in a couple of summers. I don't know about you and your family, but this is the first summer in a couple of summers where people really got to have traditional summer vacations again. It sort of feels like. And if you look at some of those supporting stats, if you look at domestic travel, if you look at stats from the TSA, travel is up for July year over year, 11 double digits. International travel is back. Domestic travel is back above what it was pre-pandemic. So you could look and just say this year over year comparison at foot traffic is maybe due to the fact that people in July and August, and I don't know how your business worked, but it sort of felt to me like all summer somebody was on vacation somewhere. You know what I mean? So But I would say what's really interesting to me is looking at these trends. I would say overall, what we are seeing in our portfolio, and for those of you who don't know about Eden's, we are really retail focused, and we own over 100 retail assets, 14 million square feet of retail, from Boston to Miami to Dallas, Houston, Austin, Denver, and the West Coast now, California and Washington State. So I think we have a really good look at things. What we are seeing is that consumers want to be back out. Consumers want to come back to the brick and mortar kind of environment. And consumers, if we've learned anything through this pandemic, consumers can change their minds really, really quickly. But I would say what we are seeing is some concern about the economic headwinds that you mentioned. But the consumers still want to be out. They want to treat themselves. They want to meet with their community. They're a little sick of sort of being cooped up. So I would say there are probably a lot of trends that we could dig into, and you guys would do a great job sort of overlaying that analysis. But I would think about this in light of, sales continue to be up? Are people making less trips but buying more, which could explain some of the foot traffic? But I think all trends that we're seeing are that the consumer has come back, and that the consumer is eager to, in the brick and mortar environment, meet their community and support their, especially local retailers.
I think you bring up so many important points. One of the big ones that we've been talking about a lot is, yes, the return of travel, the comparison to 21, which was a really, to 21, yeah, which was a really strong summer season. You couldn't travel, you were allowed out. There was this kind of wave of visits. But I also think one of the big things that we were kind of looking at is the combo factor of inflation and high gas prices. Because inflation says, how do I maximize the dollars I spend? But gas prices says, oh, should I leave the house this weekend? Is it worth going on this trip? Should I go less times? Should I stock up more? And I think what you're seeing in late August is people starting to realize gas prices are starting to drop a little bit. And as that comes back, I think it's on the visit side, it's a really important element to watch. I think it's super important to, like you said, to understand that there's so many elements that go into this, and to kind of try to contextualize each one of them. But one of those elements that I think is really important to be having in mind is that year-over-year metrics are limited in many cases for lots of different reasons. So for example, when we look at grocery, year-over-year, the entire sector is down. Yet when we look year over 3 years, so we compare it to 2019, it's way up. So you see a segment that, yes, things are down in the short term, but they're way up compared to where they were pre-pandemic. How do you attempt, and by the way, there's the reverse true. You have some who are way up year over year, but they're down compared to where they were in 2019. How do you contextualize performance? How do you make sense of these kind of data points, even things like sales data, when you know you're operating in a strange environment?
Yes, I think that's great. And I think you have to look at different periods of time, just like you've done here. You have to kind of look at different metrics than you might have pre-pandemic, was just sort of a year over year kind of comparison. Today, it's a comparison, a year over year comparison, but also a pre-pandemic to today kind of comparison, just like you've shown here. And I think the things that you have to consider is that is the trends around eating at home, the trends around still a flexible work environment where at some point in time people may be working from home. You have to look at things around the use of Instacart and delivery services. I think I think you're seeing people return to wanting to come to the store. I think a lot of that is related to sort of the price of Instacart, and I think they feel like can get more value by coming to the store. I think there's a social component that people like to come to their places. But I think what you're seeing, what we've heard from Walmart, is that basket sizes are bigger, and trips may be shorter. To your point, it'll be interesting to see yes, on the one hand, inflation is up and the cost of your dozen eggs and your loaf of bread and your milk is up. I can't get over, my husband notices it a lot. So that if my husband notices it, you know that it's serious. Um, but um, but gas prices are coming down, which in some way, on the other hand, provides some relief. So I think what we do at Edens is we look at lots of different metrics. It's not just about trips to us. It's about trips. It's about dwell time. It's about engagement. And we can talk about that as we get into this conversation and ways to sort of continue the, uh, continue people's desire, giving them something to come out of their homes for, giving them something to of value to make it worth spending a little extra on gas or whatever for. And I think that's really important as we think about the role that retail plays, and the way to capture, people's time.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make so many important points there, and one of them was kind of the balance of, you know, magnitude of visit. So, you kind of call this out, like, we said, we're showing people vote with their feet, we're showing you how they vote. But as true as that statement is, there is a caveat of different types of visits can be worth different amounts, right? And so one of the metrics that we've always used to proxy increases in basket size is visit duration. And interestingly, when we looked at June and July of 22, as Target and Walmart were seeing those year-over-year visits start to decline, we saw their visit duration start to increase. And so clearly there was a more significant visit taking place. By the way, interestingly, I think more to account for the gas prices than the inflation, because you're going to spend $100 on your trip. Maybe now you're spending a little less. Maybe you're focusing a little bit more on essentials and less on discretionary, but you still need to purchase things. It's the change in the psychology when the visit itself is so expensive that I think has such a massive effect. And I think this has been one of the really interesting outcomes from the pandemic, when we called this mission-driven shopping, to now through all these shifts that we've seen in the last few years. Do you think, though, that there are things that we need to learn as, retail real estate professionals about how adaptable the consumer seems to be, so that they can still take part in brick and mortar retail?
Yeah, I think if we've learned anything, it's how quickly the consumer changes. And that doesn't, that's influenced by things like inflation and gas prices and things like that. It's also influenced by social media. I think there are a couple of things that we know about consumers today. First and foremost, how quickly the pace of change is. Number one, that consumers are unbelievably adaptable. Number two is that consumers today are interested more in experiences than they are in goods. It is very clear. 61% of consumers say they would spend more on experiences than goods. People are craving content, right? You can look at that at any level. You can say, whatever new show Netflix is coming out with, or Apple Plus is coming out with, from that level to just wanting to learn more, wanting to, engage with brands in a different way, understand their environment, climate, being politically active. People are dying to consume content. And so I think landlords that can provide experiences and content, and retailers and brands that can provide experiences and content and education is really, really valuable. And I think the third big thing I would say that you need to think about is that, listen, I think this is like 101. If you can capture someone's time and attention, right, you capture their wallet share. And so those are all the kinds of things I think we need to think about. What does the consumer want? They don't want to just be buying things anymore. They want to buy experiences. They want to come to places where they can engage with their community that feel meaningful. They want content, which could be anything from a farmer's market, a local farmer's market, to a concert, to I don't know, roller skating rink, take you back to Ethan when you and I were teenagers. It could be a whole variety of things, but they want experience, they want content. And if you can capture their time and attention and their eyeballs and then you can also capture their wallet share. Does that make sense?
No, I think it's such an important point. I know we're going to dive into this even more later, but it's one of the things that we're seeing across different shopping center types, especially the ones that are really forward thinking, is understanding that the mix is it's not pure retail. It's how do we have experiences mixed in with dining, mixed in with retail, because the customer is looking for something a little bit more holistic, a little bit more comprehensive, and there's a lot of really interesting metrics that prove out how valuable that can be. And I think it's dead on. We had a question come in that I didn't answer before because it was going to be on this, we're going to be touching on this slide. It's, our visits down across all sectors. How's upscale lifestyle visitation compared to, essential retail? And I think what's interesting there is when we talk about kind of the economic headwinds, they've clearly had a bigger impact on non-essential retail. And we don't mean non-essential the way we did pandemic times. We mean like, discretionary spending, things that, you put off versus grocery, clothes for your kids, et cetera. And whether it's home improvement, whether it's brands like Best Buy, we're starting to see those segments really bounce back. We're seeing a pretty stark recovery over the last 3-4 weeks, even longer, that those visits are starting to climb back. So obviously, there's things that the retailers need to do to sustain that momentum. But are there things that the shopping center owners can do also that kind of keep this positive wave going deeper into September and as we head into the holiday season?
Wait, before we talk about that, can you help me understand this chart a little bit? Is this telling us that home improvement over the last year visits are down?
Yes. Home improvement saw this incredible peak throughout the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then it was never going to be able to sustain it.
Right.
But even compared to that baseline, things are starting to bounce back.
Okay.
Interestingly, Best Buy, what this is looking at with Best Buy is actually week over week visits. So it's showing the trend line. So they had been kind of static, seeing visits down because they're, again, if I'm worried about inflation and gas prices, do I need to spend, big money on a laptop right now, or, a new gaming system? I can push that off maybe. And so, but now we're seeing the visits really start to climb there as well. And there is this wider sense that discretionary spending is starting to come back. And I think that bodes really well. But what are the things that we can do to kind of help that wave sustain itself?
Got it. So wait, but before we answer that question, which I'm happy to, the home improvement slide is probably a comparison period.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes, it looks like everything's down, but that's just because you're comparing to a year before where you saw extraordinary gains.
Sure.
So this is a comparison.
Mm-hmm.
And the week over week related to Best Buy shows maybe some trends that are happening around sort of electronics. It feels like it maybe aligns a little bit with back to school, which, back to college, back to school, which feels like that should make sense to me, right?
Sure, but not after I guess the thing that stood out to us, and that was pretty glaring when you looked at chain level data across these segments.
Mm-hmm.
If you weren't, everyone was feeling it. Grocery felt it, superstores, everyone felt it. But if you weren't a necessary dollar, you were going to feel it more. But then things started to shift. And when you look at even home improvement, it's one thing that they're down compared to being in a really high place. But it's the fact that gap is starting to shrink.
Got it.
And that's I think what's exciting here is that we're starting to see a little bit more power behind that spending on things that are not essential.
I see. Well, again, so your question is, what can landlords do to help sort of extend the momentum? Mm-hmm. I think it's, listen, landlords, whether we want to admit it or not, we're competing for people's time and attention, right? You're competing, at least with open air, what we do, you're competing with people's alternative which is, to stay at home and order off of their computers and stuff like that. So you really need our kind of three pillars to think about in creating an engaging, dynamic place and experience has to do with how we design our places, how we merchandise them, and how we engage the community. And that's how we think about it. So what can landlords be doing? You can create an environment that makes people want to leave their living room and come out. We believe that meeting with your community is in person is really an engaging experience that is really valuable to people. And especially getting back to really a normal rhythm of life, people are happy to do that. We think that, there's still this like COVID overhang. Some people like to be able to do it in an outside environment. And so really providing that kind of what we call placemaking, where you have outside, you can eat outside, there's green space outside, you make your places so they're easily accessible, not just by car, but on foot or on bike. You know what I mean? You do things in a placemaking environment to help make it a really compelling reason for people to come out. And you create this place for the community to meet. And people may not be able to put their finger on it, but they like to be in places where there's a lot of energy, where there are other people, where people come and they bring their dog and the kids are outside, having some ice cream, and which is just a different environment. Then you create a merchandise mix, which addresses both their needs for convenience and value and their desire to be outside and see new things and learn new things. And that has to be a really delicate mix of national retailers that address maybe those convenience needs and those value needs, and local retailers. I think one thing that came out of the pandemic was really this hyper localization. People want to be able to support their local bookseller, their local coffee shop, their local boutique. I think some interesting things we've seen too is that even in this inflationary environment, people want to treat themselves. There are little treats, whether it is, whether it's your Frappuccino or whether it's, getting a new lip gloss at Sephora, whatever it is, health, beauty, wellness, little coffee, everybody will still prioritize a treat. I would say the third thing is community engagement, just creating unique reasons for people to come out. And that can be anywhere from, farmers markets to, local concerts to movie night to, we've done a variety of things, and we can sort of talk more about that. But those are the kinds of things that we do and think about to make that, to make it compelling to leave your house and venture out. And venture out with something that's sort of meaningful and,
I think it's so important, that kind of dual-edged sword, that on the one hand, it's the tenants who have to be working to kind of drive that excitement within the location. But then that macro perspective that only the center, the mall, that can provide is this is the day. So you're not just going to the supermarket, you're going to the supermarket and then you're getting that kind of treat yourself coffee. You're not just having to do that shop your ground and grab lunch afterwards. There's going to be a concert there that you're going to walk the dog to. Like, I do think that's such a big piece of it. And one of the interesting things I think that's happening with a lot of specific properties is we're recognizing how important the brand of the shopping center is. So it's not just the tenants that make it up, but it's actually that shopping center means something. You have a certain expectation of it. It provides something that a single retailer can't. And I think that's a really interesting outcome of what we've been seeing of late, is that kind of exchange between the tenants, the shopping center itself. I'm going to skip the next slide just so we have enough time to get to some of the other questions, because it's time to look forward, and we have someone as with as much expertise as you. We need to get a sense of your understanding of where the world is heading, right? And so one of the things I wanted to talk about is a little bit about the migration impact. So you're operating in many different areas around the country. Some of those areas are among those that are widely discussed as key beneficiaries of some shifts in migration, or in some cases, just speeding up of trends that were already happening. And I think we've seen significant impacts from migration, whether it be a shift to the suburbs, a rise of different areas, increases in migration to like rising cities like in Austin or a Tampa Bay. What impact did these patterns have on retail real estate decision making?
That's a great question. So my day job, like you mentioned, is to be the chief investment officer for Eden. So I actually spend a lot of my time looking at these kinds of trends about where people are moving and sort of what that means. So what we have seen, and I don't think there's anything groundbreaking here, is a trend towards Southeast markets, Southern markets, Southeast, Southwest markets. And I think there are a couple of things driving that. One is, first and foremost, I really think quality of life. People are moving to where they can have a great quality of life. And I think that's influenced by, your surrounding environment, whether you love the mountains or the water, where you want to be able to hike, 9 months out of the year and things like that. So I think that's one trend that's driving it that we follow. And when your young and educated population starts to move like that, clearly your jobs follow. So Denver has been a huge market for us, and those Austin as well. And that's sort of, a couple of the drivers that are moving there. Atlanta, another one. So quality of life, Charleston. We just made a big purchase in Kiowa Island, and we're seeing that for quality of life reasons. The other reasons I think that are driving people to move are some of the tax burden, tax kind of considerations. And so South Florida has been a huge beneficiary of that. Texas, sorry for the banging in the background, Texas as well. So those are the things we're seeing. I think what you need to do, though, Ethan, is balance between, looking at things on a percentage basis versus on a gross basis. Because for smaller markets, on a percentage basis, it looks like you could have a ton of people moving there, but really on a gross basis, it doesn't compare to how many new people LA sees, every month or every year. So the way I think about it is we like, sort of large, stable markets with growth potential and with high quality growth potential as we think about, jobs, job growth, and income growth and things like that. So I'm fascinated to know how you picked Montana and Idaho and stuff like that. And I would be fascinated to know how this looks on a gross basis versus a percentage basis. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think you're dead on. I think what makes these areas pop is the fact that they had significantly smaller populations. And then you also, let's see where this is in 3 years from now. We are in, I think this idea, we were in a conversation on not that long ago of what the world is like now. We're like, guys, this isn't normal yet. We haven't hit that. We're still in a recovery post-pandemic. We're still in this unique economic environment. I don't think our virtual work thing has really settled out yet completely to where what will be quote unquote normal. We are far away from that. And so I think we're still in this.
I think honestly, if you're looking for normal, like that's part of the problem. I don't think there's not going to be normal ever again, right? The consumer showed us how quickly they can change. Like the world has showed us how quickly things can move. Interest rates, and I think this is our new normal. To be honest,
of all, you mean of the volatility, like just a lot of ongoing change.
Yes.
And that's really interesting. I struggle with this in certain elements because in some cases I hear what you're saying and you're 100% right. We're never going back to, all of us going 5 days a week to the office. We're never going back to certain, restrictions that existed. But then there's other elements that I think we're, a difficult job market away from, people not being 2 days a week from home or not living living within a degree of separation of their workplace as opposed to on the other side of the country. I think that's all, that's where I say for me, I don't know, but I hear your point that there is a likelihood of just embracing this volatility and likely other causes of that volatility too. I mean, we saw, like, just when we thought the world was getting back on track, a war breaks out in Eastern Europe, and then, whatever, we can go down. We'll avoid that rabbit hole. But one of the things that we did want to talk about was, I think we've spoken about the shopping center's role, but very specifically in terms of kind of driving excitement. One of the things we did, we put out a white paper recently that looked at malls that were seeing really significant impact from the launch of a really big dining option, a kind of indoor casino, some sort of gaming feature within the mall, these kind of non-classic, more experience-oriented features driving these really significant upticks in visits. And it's like you said, people are looking for experiences. So I wonder, from your perspective, how is the ideal mix? Like, when we think about what belongs in a center, how is that changing? And what does that mean for retail real estate? Because greater optionality seems lovely, but greater optionality means more complexity. How do you figure out what really works together? You just have more options now.
Mm-hmm. Well, we use Placer a lot to measure things. We are huge believers in that you can't manage what you can't measure. So you really need to be able to measure what community engagement and events and marketing sort of does for you, does for your bottom line. So the measurements that you help us to be able to evaluate are very, very helpful. And what I would say is that there are a couple of dimensions that we look at. One, look at, like you did here, how does either an event or new retailer opening sort of drive additional foot traffic. We also look at how much of that foot traffic is new foot traffic. I think there are some things about a neighborhood center that you love. We like to measure, we like to bring people to our places, 5 times a week or 3 times a week for 5 hours of dwell time, right? We have some like metrics that we like to circle around. And so you like to bring back regular customers, but you also like to bring in, broaden your reach and bring in new customers. So we like to look at how events bring new customers. We like to look how consistent events help to grow that. And we like to look at how events that are not only driven by the landlord, but driven in partnership with our retailers helps to drive that foot traffic, that dwell time, and bringing in new customers. So I don't know if all that.
What does that mean? What does that mean in partnership with the? How do you break down like an event that this is the shopping center versus an event that's done in partnership with a retailer?
Oh, well, that is a great question. So listen, we do events. We work with. I'll give you some national retailers that we've done a lot of work with. We work with Williams-Sonoma, and they bring in a guest chef who's got a new cookbook out, and they do an event where they invite, they have great reach and amazing knowledge about their customers. So they do an event to bring in a chef who's got a new book out and does a book signing, or does a class around cooking. We do a lot of work with Total Wine when they want to do a cool whiskey tasting or wine tasting. I mean, I think retailers, and then there are promotional things, I guess, like back to school and stuff, but Lululemon, has all their ambassadors out there, and they love to do, yoga classes with their local ambassadors. I think that's a really important part of not only the role of our brick and mortar real estate, but the role of the landlord. I mean, if anything or one of the additional lessons that have come out of the pandemic is that, there are lots of ways that we can partner with our retail partners in order to help drive engagement and share information about, what we think works. So I think there are things that the landlord can do and sponsor, and a great, in April, we do at Mosaic here in DC, we do a great like welcome to spring and an April blooms kind of event that brings the community. But there's a whole other level of, our local bike shop starts their bike runs every Saturday morning out of their bike shop. There are lots of ways that you can reach your customers, work with your partners, and bring the community together and engage with the community.
I mean, I do think that kind of recognition of that mutually benefiting area has grown as a result of the pandemic, because so many landlords had to figure out ways to support tenants. It created a collaboration that probably just didn't exist before, because it didn't have to in the same extent. And I think it's probably a long-term positive. A question came in that I want to get to, and I think it's because I think it's really interesting. Brings up, will the work from home option cause friction in the future? Retailer distribution workers must physically show up while their managers work from home. Someone gets promoted, all of a sudden they don't have to work from the office or from the space anymore. Do you think this is going to create a challenge? I mean, I will start that I was on a panel with a very large company that has both office and kind of warehouse workers, and on this, in the prep calls, that's exactly what he said. Work from home has to be limited for them, because they can't create this, oh, the office workers get this and you manufacturer, you have to come in every single day. I wonder what your take on what that balance might look like because of those elements.
Wow, I thought that question was going to be more like what's the impact to your neighborhood open air retail center of
Yeah,
work?
but even let's think about it from the retail center. But it's you're seeing struggles to hire people. You're seeing more people say, well, I don't want to do this. I would rather go, live on the road and do something different that allows me. Like, how do we create a balance there? How do we incentivize this?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think you're seeing a lot of our retailers, especially our local retail, all of our retailers actually struggle with being able to hire workers and sort of sustain that sort of workforce environment that is really, really critical. And I think that's the struggle that we as retail landlords are going to have, and need to support our retail partners in doing that. I would say in the business I'm in what I do every day, having people back in the office for us has been, like this great breath of fresh air. It has been really fun to be able to have meetings face to face in person. It's even been fun to just like have the chit chat. I miss some of the just chit chat. I do think that what needs to happen everywhere, and I think what's happening, is just some degree of greater flexibility. And I think employees appreciate that. And that's important in having sort of a healthy, productive, really positive work environment. So I don't think I have all the answers on that one, but I do think that is a big question that sort of needs to be resolved.
I think you touch on a big one when you talk about the kind of the rigidity versus flexibility and how important that is, no matter what sector you kind of operate in. So two quick hitters before we unfortunately have to wrap. So one, we have this big holiday season coming up. What is one bold prediction you have for the holiday season? I would tell you, I made mine that this wasn't about the holidays, but I feel really good about Kohl's, and the number of LinkedIn exchanges I'm having with other people who cover the sector is tenfolded, and it is an island though I am proud to stand on. What is your bold holiday prediction?
I don't know if it's a bold holiday prediction, but my prediction or hot take, that's what my older kids would call it.
Yeah.
Is I think in-person movies are gonna, I know Regal just declared bankruptcy. I think they're gonna come out stronger from it. I think movies in person are coming back. I don't know about you, Ethan, but I went to see Top Gun Maverick in a absolutely every seat was taken, sold out theater. And that was after like I got shut out for the real time that I wanted and had to go like, you know, the next day because I couldn't get a ticket. Absolutely sold out, every seat filled. I think people love one seeing those kinds of movies on the big screen. And I think there is something about seeing a movie like whether it's the theater on Broadway or the theater of a movie. I think people love being together to have those kinds of experiences. That's my
I
hot take.
agree with you so much. I think what we forgot is theaters are always the overperformer in periods where there's economic challenges, and because we need the escape, we need to, you know, give ourselves an out, and that is a fairly cost effective. My big thing though for theaters though is there's a content problem. There's not enough content, and there's so many ways to solve it, but they have to find a way. This was my favorite debate of like 2020 was, remember like summer 2020, there was, who's going to buy AMC? Is it going to be Disney? Is it going to be Amazon? And that was, to me, it was like, whoever can give them cool new content, that's who I want. But I love that prediction. And then the last one, when you look at thus far, we're you know 8 full months into the year, we're into month 9. What is the biggest lesson that retail real estate professionals need to learn from a year that has been, I'd say, noteworthy to say the least?
I think, wait, I want to understand what is this chart telling us?
So this is our indoor mall index. So our mall index looks at 100 top tier indoor malls across the country. And then this is tracking a year over year. So the visits are down, but they're only down like a couple of percentage points, again, to a very strong 21. Things are in top indoor malls are doing very well.
Got it. And this is versus a year ago. Okay, got it. Okay, so what I'd say is the biggest lesson is kind of a general lesson, but what our CEO loves to say is what we discovered in the pandemic is the real need and value of radical communication, meaning frequent communication, transparent communication, consistent communication, whether it's, you know, your employees, whether it's your retail partners, whether it's your investors, your board. Radical communication in times like this and highly volatile times is really, really important. And so that's a big lesson that I think we can carry through everything we do and looking forward.
It's so interesting. I really love that point, but it also ties in, you've spoken so consistently throughout the conversation about placemaking and creating engagement and creating understanding that social aspect that drives the visit and what we're trying, this kind of a very human relationship that exists, whether it's into organization or as a shopping center to the customers, as a shopping center to the tenants, between the tenants and their customers. Like these relationships are so important. I think we have a tendency sometimes to lose sight of it and make it too mechanical. People come because of value. People come and there's something more there.
Yeah,
I think what's been really exciting is you see more and more players, especially within retail real estate, even more than other sectors, who are understanding that the humanness, I know it's not a word, but of the visit, the humanity of the visit, like what's driving it, I spoke to one gentleman who said, we were talking about experiential retail. He said experiential retail is when you go into a Rolex store and they put out that fancy mat and then they put the watch down. It's like, that's experiential retail because it's telling you it's fancy. It's telling you you're fancy. And obviously not all of us are looking for that, but there is that element of, I think, the brands and the places that get it right understand it's those little touches that make it an experience.
Yeah, I think you really said it well. I think the way we at Edens look at things is that we're in the business of humanity, and we believe our places really are centers for community engagement, and that's what our purpose is. That's what our purpose is. So so I think you and I are on the same page. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share it all.
No, thank you, Jamie. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Thank you all for joining in and for listening. Coming up in just in 2 weeks, we have our next webinar. We're going to be focusing on the retail as a media network. I can't recommend joining this one enough. We're going to be talking about some new tool and a new data set that we're bringing in. It's a really exciting thing that we feel a lot of energy around. But thank you everyone for joining. Jamie, thank you again so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Have a wonderful rest of your day.